Hi, folks. This is your friendly neighborhood Mr. Thomas again, and this is episode number 13, I believe it is. Episode number 13. Let me check that to make sure this is accurate. Yes, it's episode number 13 because I'm uploading episode number 12, which I just recorded. Episode number 13, and we are talking about chapter 9 in the text, Putting Clips in Motion. The first part of chapter 9, the episode 12, just basically gave you an introduction to what animation is, keyframes, sequence clips, the effect controls panel, basics like that. So if you haven't watched episode number 12, you want to go back and watch that one before we start on this one, because this one goes a little bit more in depth and you need information from the previous tutorial. Okay, so as you can see, we're starting off where we ended, and one of the things I promised you I would do is I would talk about keyframes in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to go into full detail right now, but what I will do is I will give you a good definition of keyframes. I'm going to make my effect controls panel full screen by making sure it is active with the blue frame around it and pressing the tilde key on the keyboard. You can see that, and I mentioned this before, my two keyframes are designated by these two diamonds in this effect controls mini timeline. Okay, remember I defined a keyframe is a point in time at which a parameter has a specific value. You create animation by having two keyframes at two different points in time with two different values for the same parameter. Okay, so, or it could be stated as a definition for a keyframe. A keyframe defines where an object is, parameter value, at a particular point in time, which is a timecode value. Of course, this definition is far too restrictive because, as you know, you can create animations not just with moving an object from point A to point B on the screen, but you can set parameters for things like opacity, effects, which we're going to find out about momentarily. Um, as far as I mentioned to you that there are 4 ways to animate sequence clips in Adobe Premiere Pro. The first one we demonstrated in Chapter 12's video tutorial was animating a sequence clip by setting keyframes for default motion effect properties for a sequence clip. These properties are properties like scale, rotation, and position, and I animate them in the effect controls panel for a selected sequence clip. So these parameters that I talked about before, position, scale, rotation, anchor point, opacity, those are properties, okay? And we call those motion effect properties because every time you edit a clip to the timeline, they always come with this set of properties that you see here, okay? When I add an effect to a clip, additional properties will become available to me, but even if I don't have an effect added to a clip, I always have these properties, okay? The second way to animate a clip is by setting keyframes for a user applied transform effect property for a sequence clip. Transform effects are effects, they look a lot of times just like the motion effects, which are these right here. Notice they're under a category called motion. That's why we call them motion effects. Transform effects are very similar to that, except for I have to apply these transform effects from the effects panel. So I'm gonna click on the effects panel in the project panel, effects panel in the project frame, I'm sorry, go full screen, and I'm going to, let's just type in rotation, okay? Okay. Maybe we have another name. Let's go into the video effects window and let's find some transform. Let's find some transform effects. Okay. If I look in the transform folder here, that's inside of the video effects folder, make sure you don't go to the video transitions folder right here. Make sure you're in the video effects folder, and I spin down the transform section, you see that I have different parameters like audio reframe, crop, edge feather, horizontal flip, vertical flip. Okay, in the old days, you had a lot more than that. But the idea is that I'll spin that opacity here. Okay, and you can see what that's all about. But the idea is that these transform effects they operate a little differently from the motion effects. So transform effects I have to apply from the effects panel, okay, inside of the transform folder, and the motion effects are under the motion category for the sequence clip that I've edited to the timeline. And the motion effects always come applied to a sequence clip as soon as you edit it to the timeline, okay? Okay, the reason you may say, well, why would I want to apply a transform effect as opposed to a motion effect? What's the difference between the two, in other words? Other than applying them from the effect controls panel, other than applying them from the effects panel, sometimes animating a sequence clip with a user applied transform effect like that crop effect that we saw earlier, okay? Sometimes using that effect to make some kind of change with the clip. Sometimes that will have some advantages as far as workflow. That means the order in which I am doing things. That's what a workflow is, the order in which you are doing things. Or rendering, okay? Rendering is basically, hey, I've told the computer what to do. Now the computer has to do the math on what I've told it to do so it can actually show it to me. As it is processing this math, that process is called rendering, okay? All right. So that's the second way. So, you could, of course, very easily see that if I were to apply a crop transform effect to this first clip, all I would have to do is just click and drag the crop effect and drop it on the clip that I want to apply it to. And you can see here, I have another set of parameters. I have the crop effect, and then I have left, right, top, bottom, edge feather effects, or parameters, sorry. I have left, right, top, bottom, edge feather parameters. Notice that each one of them has my stopwatch. Anytime you see a stopwatch, that means that that's a parameter that can be animated over time, okay? So just to show you what I can do here is if I look at the left parameter, it's at 0%. That means the left edge of the screen has no crop. But if I scrub, it will crop it from the left edge. If I scrub the top parameter, it'll crop from the top and the right and the bottom. Okay, and of course I have an edge feather parameter, okay, that will make, when the numbers get lower for edge feather, you can, excuse me, you can see that the edges of the clip become feathered or fuzzy. So it doesn't look like really straight, hard edges. All right, let's turn that back, return that to 0. So that would be a transform effect. I could animate this very easily for you. I'll just animate the left edge. I'll crop it over a period of time. One thing I'm going to show you that I can do is, because of the fact that I can see my crop effect and I can see my motion effects at the same time, and I can jump from keyframe to keyframe using my next keyframe and previous keyframe buttons, what I can do is I can coordinate my keyframes between effects. So I can put a crop keyframe exactly where my keyframe for my position keyframe is, right here at time 000. I can first jump to the first keyframe, which I already have done, and then let's hit the stopwatch for the left parameter. But before I do that, I just want to go through that process again. Set your starting time where you want it to be for the animation, because I'm going to animate the crop parameter. Set your starting parameter value where you want it to be at the starting time. The left parameter value for crop is 0%. That's where I want to start. The third step, hit the stopwatch button. The fourth step is move to a later point in time. Like I said, I'm going to coordinate my keyframes between my two effects. I'm going to click the next go to next keyframe button for the position parameter. I'm going to click the go to next keyframe button for the position parameter. And you're going to see I'm going to jump to the position parameters keyframe button. I know it belongs to the position parameter, these two keyframes, because they're in the same horizontal row. Okay, so I'm at 2 seconds and 23 frames, which is where the position keyframe is. I also want to have a crop keyframe, my left crop keyframe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just change the value. Last step, just change the value. Let's say that it does a crop out entirely so that it wipes the image off the screen entirely. Let's take a look at these two effects animating this one clip in unison. So as you can see, we are animating I'm going to set an in point at my first keyframe and an out point at my second keyframe. Okay. Okay. And so, what happens is that I see two things happening. I see the clip moving from left to right, and I also see the clip cropping at the same time. Okay. The reason why I set an in point and an out point at my two keyframes is because of the fact that I wanted to go to my button bar. I go to my button bar, or my button editor, by clicking the plus button. And here are a bunch of commands that are not on my button bar, which is below the program monitor. I'm going to drag my play in to out command to my button bar. Just drag it from the button editor down to the button bar and let go and click OK. So now you can see it's going to play from my in point to my out point. All right. And also, let's see what happens if I go back to my button editor and drag my loop playback button down. Okay, and click OK. So let's go ahead and hit the space bar. It'll play. Oh, I'm sorry, not the space bar. I want to play in to out. So I'm going to press the play in to out button, just like that. Okay, and it played in to out. It didn't loop it, but at least it played in to out, and I can play in to out again by just pressing the button again. Okay. All right, very good. So I've seen a transform effect, and I'm looking at a motion effect that are working simultaneously. All right, I'm going to do an Option X to delete both my in point and my out points that I set. Okay. Also, I just want to let you know this little mini timeline in the effect controls panel is the same thing as the sequence down here in the timeline, with the exception of the only thing I am seeing in my effect controls timeline, mini timeline, is whatever clip is selected in my sequence. You can look at I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to make my effect controls panel a little bit bigger. I'll make the mini timeline area a little bit bigger. If you look at where the playhead is in the effect controls mini timeline, and look at where the playhead is in the timeline, they're both at 121. Look at down there in the lower left-hand corner of the effect controls panel, and look at the timeline reader there, the playhead position rather, in the sequence. They're both at 1 second and 21 frames in. So my effect controls panel mini timeline in my main sequence are slaved together. So they're essentially the same thing, except for I'm only seeing in my mini timeline, my effect controls panel, I'm only seeing the clip that is selected. Because that's the second way that I can animate a sequence clip in Premiere Pro. The third way is to set keyframes using user applied basic 3D properties. Okay, now I know it looks like everything is in a flat plane here. I only have left to right and up to down, and I don't really have a whole lot going on as far as being able to come out of the screen, which would be on the z-axis, or go into the screen, which is on the z-axis. However, Premiere can simulate an object rotating in 3D. Okay, and those are a subset, a basic set of properties in a basic set of properties inside of the effects panel. Okay, and for example, the basic 3D effect. So it's kind of like a transform effect, but it's just in a category other than transform. It's in the perspective parameter, the perspective category of the effects. I'm going to simply drag this basic 3D effect and drop that on top. Notice how I can layer effect after effect after effect. The first effect, which is my motion effect, is always at the top of the list. And every effect that I lay on my clip after that is laid on the clip below the last effect. So the higher the effect is up on the stack here, the more recently, the less recently it was applied. So in essence, this is the first clip, first in the stack. This is the second, this is the first effect that came with the clip, first in the stack. This is the second effect that I applied, second in the stack. This is the third effect that I applied, third in the stack. Okay, because that's going to become important when we start talking about the order in which you apply effects to clips, because it can change the lookup significantly if, for example, I were to crop it, but I applied the basic 3D effect first. So I basically changed their stacking order by simply dragging the basic 3D effect by its title bar and dragging it above or below the crop effect. I look for that blue line to tell me when I'm in the right place to let go of the mouse. Okay? All right. So you can see the basic 3D effect here. I have parameters. Remember, everything with the stopwatch means that you can keyframe it. And I have swivel and tilt and distance to, I can't remember what this is, distance to screen. It's like it's going in and out on the z-axis. So it's like I can make it like it's coming closer towards you or further away. Okay, let's set that to 0. Okay, but let's look at swivel. I'm going to just scrub these values. See how swivel, it's like it animates it like it's an opening door. Now I know it looks like it's in 3D, in 3 dimensions, but it's really an illusion. It's just like skewing that image so that it's a regular rectangle here. Now it's like a shortened rectangle. Okay, now it is a really short squash rectangle. Now it is a squash rectangle going in the opposite direction, almost like a trapezoid. Now it is, a longer rectangle, going in the opposite direction. So we flipped it, okay? And I did that by scrubbing this swivel value, okay? And it works in degrees, just like a regular rotation from 0 to 100 degrees. 0 to 360 degrees. Tilt is another axis of rotation, okay? And while we're here talking about animation, this is something that should help you out with other animation applications. And that's when I swivel, I'm rotating this on the y-axis, okay? Imagine the y-axis is a spit like, when you have rotisserie chicken, you stick the spit, the long little rod through the chicken, and you rotate it, and the chicken spins around. Imagine there is a spit that is going up and down right here, okay? When I rotate the swivel parameter, when I change the swivel parameter, it's like it's rotating on that spit, okay? So, for example, you should be able to look at this and say, hey, you're rotating this on the y-axis, because as it rotates, you should be able to see an imaginary y-axis. That's the only axis that will allow me to rotate this clip like this, okay? Whereas if I'm rotating it like this, I'm rotating it on the x-axis. right? Because imagine there's a spit that goes from left to right, on the screen. And in order to get this image to rotate like this, I have to rotate a spit that is in line with the x-axis. And of course, our old-fashioned rotation here, that's part of the motion, the motion effect. Okay. In this case here, it's rotating on the z-axis, or the axis that comes out of the screen and goes into the screen. All right. All right. So swivel rotates on the y-axis, tilt rotates on the x-axis, and I could rotate them partially on all three axes at the same time if I wanted to. One thing I want you to notice is that after you do one full rotation, any rotation value will say 2, and I'd say 2 times 209. That means it's done 2 full rotations. So if a rotation is 360 degrees, it has gone 720 degrees, which is 360 times 2, and then an additional 209 degrees. If I were to scrub this a little further to do a third revolution, you're going to see that it'll get to 360, and it'll change to 3 times 0, 0, 0, and then it'll start rotating after the third rotation. 360. See that? 3 times 3 degrees, 8 degrees, 15 degrees. And so it's rotating it on the x-axis. Okay, I know it's kind of hard to determine that because it's kind of tilted here. It's kind of swiveled, rather. But if I set swivel back to 0, it's a lot more apparent that it's rotating on the x-axis. All right? So let's do this. I can think of a fun little animation we're going to do to wrap up this portion of the video, as far as being able to animate a clip using basic 3D properties. Let's pretend like this clip is spinning, but it's also getting closer to you, like that. So it's like spinning in space, but also getting closer to you at the same time. We're going to spin it, we're going to animate the spin, and then we're going to animate it getting closer to the screen. Okay, because that's what this last parameter is. Okay, this parameter animates how close it is to the viewer. Okay, how close the sequence clip is to the viewer. So I'm going to set everything to 0. Once again, I'm going to coordinate my keyframes, go back up to I can either use my position keyframes, or I can use my crop keyframe for the left side of the crop, because these two are coordinated. So I can use either one. I use the crop keyframe because of the fact that it's closer to the parameters that I want to animate in basic 3D, so I can see everything at the same time. I can see these keyframes, and I can see the keyframes I'm about to set for swivel and distance too. But notice that, I can't see the position parameter keyframes, the motion effect keyframes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my first keyframe for the left crop. Okay, I'm going to, let's be really weird. Let's say I like my, actually, let's do this. Let's set 3 different values. We've been doing them one at a time. 3 different properties or parameters, properties and parameters. Many times you use those words interchangeably. Let's set them, let's go through the animation process where I'm animating 3 different properties at the same time. Okay, so I'm at my first time. Remember, first step, set your starting time. Second step, start your starting parameter values. I'm gonna make my sequence clip come from way back there by changing the distance to parameter there. And I'm gonna start off swivel 0 degrees, that's fine. So I'm gonna hit the keyframes for swivel, I'm sorry, not swivel, let's do tilt. Let's do tilt. Tilt and distance 2, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jump to my second keyframe for the left crop effect, bam, like that. And I can't see the clip now because it's cropped all the way out, but I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to make it so that the clip is, let's make it really big, -232, I believe that is. And so that means that the more negative the number, the closer it's going to get to the screen. And let's give it, let's make it, it's 2 seconds, is it? Two, almost 3 seconds. Let's make it do 4 rotations. So I did 1, and then I'm gonna type in 4, slap 4 degrees. If I want to do four rotations, I need to go 4 times 0, like that. And it gives me 4 full rotations. All right, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so, oh, by the way, I just want to mention it to you. Look at the keyframes it gave me. It gave me what's called linear keyframes. These diamond keyframes are called linear keyframes. And let's take a look what's going on. It's going to move from left to right on the screen. It's going to crop from left to right. The image itself is going to crop from left to right, and it's going to tumble end over end. Okay, it's going to tilt, rotate. Okay, and that is rotate on the x-axis, and it's also going to get closer and closer to us. It's going to do 4 rotations. Let's take a look at what that looks like on the full screen. Pretty interesting, eh? Pretty interesting. Okay. Pretty interesting. You see, there's actually, it has something to do with the types of keyframes that I have set here, or how my keyframes are set for this clip, as far as why does it appear to go back. Okay. That has everything to do with the type of keyframes that I have set. So it's almost like this. These are 2 different shots. One is flying at you, bam, and we cut. And then when we cut back into the other shot, it's like we're looking at it floating away from us. Okay, or spinning away from us. Pretty cool, actually. All right, so we have one last method of animating a sequence clip. I'm going to clear out all of my keyframes that I have so far. An easy way to do that is to click the blue stopwatch, any blue stopwatch, toggle that animation off. Okay, that's what you want to do, toggle the animations off. Oops, it'll ask you, this action will delete all existing keyframes for the parameter that I toggle the keyframe, the stopwatch off for. So it'll just delete the keyframes for the position parameter. Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. All right, same thing with speed. Okay, well, actually, I don't need to do speed. That's a keyframe it gives me automatically under the time remapping parameter, so I'm not going to touch that. But the left crop, yes, I'm going to delete those keyframes, and the tilt crop and the distance crop. And you're going to be like, hey, wait a second, this doesn't look like what I started with originally. Why is it still upside down and kind of tilted? Well, it got rid of the animation, but it kept whatever the parameter values are. You can see here, tilt 1 times 207.9. What were the parameter values when I hit that stopwatch button to delete my keyframes? It's going to keep that static parameter value. So I want to change that parameter value back to its default state. So I'm going to hit my distance reset button. That's this little swirly arrow at the bottom, right across from the parameter. The tilt button. What else did I change? The crop button, which crop left, there we go, and the position reset parameter. Notice that the motion effects, it has a swirly button, a reset button that will reset all of the effects, not just the one I was animating. It'll reset all of them. And you can see I have the same kind of thing with the crop effect and the basic 3D effect, because you can see I could have animated, and I did animate more than one parameter. If you want to just reset all of them in one fell swoop, instead of clicking this button for each parameter that you want to reset, go ahead and hit the reset button for the whole property. Okay, the whole motion category property. We'll call that a property. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the last way to animate an object. This one works only with certain effects, some motion effects. Okay. Um, some other, it may work with some transform effects. It most likely does not work with any 3D effects, because what I have to do is I have to be able to reach in and directly grab this sequence clip and move it around in the program monitor. Okay, and it's a very direct way. A lot of people like starting off learning this way. It's not very exact, but it's very intuitive as far as how you do it. But the process stays exactly the same. My steps of doing animation, it stays the same. The only difference is, instead of setting a numerical value, which is more precise for parameters over time, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reach in and drag the clip where I want it to be in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first step set my timeline, or set my time code back to 000 at the beginning of my at the beginning of my animation. Okay, let's say I want to just change the position value. Okay, so at time 000, my position is 640 on the x-axis, 360 on the y-axis. Third step, I'm going to move the playhead I can either do it in the effect controls window, or I can do it in the timeline panel, or I can even do it in the program monitor. Because if you notice, my playhead in my program monitor is the exact same playhead that's in my effect controls timeline and in my sequence window, panel or timeline window. Okay, so this is going to be my ending point for my animation. But before I can do anything, what I have to do is, if I want to directly grab and drag this clip, and I can do it now. This is a good time to do it. Click on that motion category, or that motion property. Click on that motion property, and then now I have a bounding box around the sequence clip in the timeline, around the sequence clip in the program monitor, excuse me, and I can simply reach in and drag, okay, the drag the sequence clip. Now, I didn't set a keyframe for rotation, but let's go back to the beginning and let's do that. Okay, let's hit the step 1. I'm at time 000. Step 2, I want to say, okay, I'm gonna start off at 18% scale. That's fine. Hit the stopwatch. So I set my parameter value, starting parameter value. That's step 2. Hit the stopwatch. That's step 3. I'm gonna go to my second keyframe that I set for my position, okay, right here, by using the next keyframe button for the position parameter. Hit the motion property, and then if I hover over the edge of the clip, I'll see a curved arrow. If I click and drag that curved arrow, you can see that I'm rotating it on the z-axis. All right, so you can see that I've gotten a, did I do this right? No, I did it wrong. I didn't set a keyframe for rotation. I set it for scale, but that's okay, because guess what? I can also hover over the corner of the clip and look for a diagonal arrow. That means that when I click and drag, I'm going to scale this up. All right, you can see I have a keyframe for scale. Okay, my mistake was I didn't hit the keyframe button for rotation, which is down here. I accidentally hit the keyframe button for scale, but that's okay. Let's go back to the beginning, start all over again. Time 000. I'm okay with my rotation value. Well, actually, no, let's take it back to 0. I'm gonna set my rotation value to 0. Step 2, step 3, hit my stopwatch. Let's jump to my second keyframe for the scale parameter this time. Bam, like that. Okay, now let's go in and hit the motion property and look for the curved arrow. I'm just going to hover over, kind of move my mouse around the corner until I see a curved arrow. Now click and drag like that. Okay, I'll take it around a few times. You can see the rotation parameter. It says -2 and then -346. That means that it's going to do 2 full rotations counterclockwise and then do another 346 degrees counterclockwise rotation after that. Okay, so I should be able to see these 3 parameters, position, scale, and rotation, all animate over 1 second and 10 frames, from 0000 to 1 second and 10 frames. And this will be a demonstration of manually moving a sequence clip in the program monitor window to set keyframes for affected, they call these spatial properties. Position, scale, rotation, those are spatial properties. You can't do this with the opacity parameter, okay? These are spatial properties. So let's see what that looks like. And I'm gonna do another set in to out, set an in point at my first keyframe, set an out point at my second keyframe. Let's go back to the beginning and hit the play in to out button. Okay, see that? So it's animating in scale, it's animating in position, and it's animating in rotation. Okay, it kind of looks like what I did with the 3D effect, okay, in that it looks like the clip is getting closer, the sequence clip is getting closer to the screen. Kind of, it's rotating on the Z-axis instead of the X-axis, but it's you know, a similar idea. It looks like it's coming from a distance. You say, well, why would I use this as opposed to using the basic 3D effect? A lot of that has to do with, many times, like I said earlier, the whole reason for using a 3D effect could be that it may be more advantageous to make the clip come from far away in the background to real close up on the screen using the 3D effect, the distance parameter, distance to parameter, as opposed to scaling it up. There are different reasons as to why you want to do that. Okay, like I said before, it may be rendering time is it's not going to take as much rendering time to do the math for the effect if I use the basic 3D effect to make it come closer out of, or make it come out of the screen, or it might have an advantage. What was that second advantage? It may have a better workflow advantage, meaning that based on how I'm creating this animation, if it's a really complicated animation and I'm doing a whole lot of things with the regular old motion parameters, and I want to keep the parameter of the parameter that makes the clip come closer out of the screen, I'm going to keep that separate from my motion parameters, then I may want to use the basic 3D parameter or basic 3D effect in the distance parameter to do that. So, you know, there are different reasons as to why you want to do that. When you get into doing really complex animations, that will make a lot more sense as far as why you'd want to use a basic 3D effect or basic 3D property as opposed to a motion effect. Okay. But that's with the more advanced, complicated animations. So that wraps it up for as a demonstration of the 4 major ways to animate sequence clips in Adobe Premiere Pro. We've seen how we can animate using keyframes for the default motion effect properties. We've seen how we can set keyframes for user-applied transform effects from the effects panel in a particular folder in the effects panel. We've seen how we can set keyframes for user-applied basic 3D properties from the effects panel in the perspective folder here. And finally, we have manually reached in and moved the sequence clip around in the program monitor. But first, I would have to have the motion property selected first before I reach in and start spinning it around. So that's it. This was a little bit longer video, but that's the video tutorial. We've covered a lot of things here. We're going to kind of zip through the rest of this chapter because we'll see that a lot of the things that we talk about in the rest of the chapter, we've kind of already talked about in doing these demonstrations. So that's it. I will see you in episode 14, where we talk about, we start with adjusting the motion effect and we skim through some of the other things that we talk about in the chapter that we may have already covered in this first demo. Thanks.